They know zero trust exists, but many think it's just a pure technology solution and they can buy it off the shelf. The more I talk to folks like Michael, the more I realise, of course, is that it's not about technology, it's about process, it's about people, it's about organisational behaviours. Zero trust is almost a lifestyle.
Today on Tech Transforms, we're tackling one of the most talked about and perhaps most misunderstood ideas in cybersecurity, zero trust. This episode came together because Australia is just beginning its zero trust journey, and organizations there are running headfirst into many of the same misconceptions and myths we faced here in the United States when we first started our zero trust journey. And while we may be a little further down the zero trust path, the truth is, we still run into these myths all the time. That's why this conversation matters now. I'm joined by Chris Rule, General Manager Defense at GME, a company supporting defense, national security, and critical infrastructure organizations across Australia and the region. GME works closely with OWL Cyber Defense to help customers navigate complex, high-assurance security challenges, which puts Chris in a unique position to see where zero trust understanding breaks down in the real world. I'm also joined by Michael Blake, Technical Fellow at OWL Cyber Defense, who works hands-on with government agencies implementing zero trust, modernizing legacy systems, and designing architectures that assume breaches are inevitable. Together, Chris and Michael bring two sides of the same problem, one from the front lines of customer conversations in Australia, and one from deep technical implementation experience in the US, making them the perfect duo. When I think about zero trust, and when I hear you talk about zero trust, it sounds like it's part of that defense in depth philosophy and strategy.
Yeah. It's a collection of industry best practices, really. It's all the things that we should probably have been doing anyway, but more formalized. And then there are specific kind of checklists and some criteria that you can now be evaluated against to verify that you actually have kind of achieved some of the goals that zero trust sets out.
All right. Well, let's set the table and give it to me in plain English and just give me the core principles of zero trust. Sometimes there's 5 pillars. CISA likes to do 5 pillars. DOW, I think, has 6 or 7. They always have to have more.
So, I mean, it really comes down to the concept of containing the breach, or the blast radius is what is often described. So when malware comes into your network, does it have access to everything? If a malicious actor exploits and gets inside your network, do they have access to everything? And in the old way, if you came in the office and you weren't on the VPN and you came to your desk, you just had access to everything that was out there on the network, whether you needed it or not. And over time, it's become much more finely grained controlled about having access to only things that you really need to have access. What zero trust has done is, and it's been proven pretty well by many of the different like Salt Typhoon breaches that have been out there, the nation state actors are persistent on many of these networks. So it's no longer assumed that if I come in and I bring my computer from home and I can plug it into the corporate network, that it's going to be nice and clean. The new assumption is that we probably have a persistent malicious actor at some point in our network, whether it's a service technician that brings in a laptop to fix something, right? You just assume that threat is there. So then if you assume the threat is there, you don't know where the threat is, so you don't trust anything. Everything has to authenticate. All of your data flows are supposed to be mapped, so you figure out what machines need to talk to what machines. And that way, if a hacker comes in and finds an exploit and lands on one machine, they can't do what's called a pivot. They can't immediately jump from there and spread it out across your network. And that's kind of the thought process now is, I don't trust my employees. I don't trust my machines. Not necessarily because they're a bad actor, but the devices and the environments that they go into have those nation state actors present.
Right. And the old metaphor of We no longer just give keys to the castle and you have access to everything inside the castle, but you've got to have access to the individual rooms and even the individual data, but we'll get to that. Chris, why did you feel a need to talk about this for our Australian friends?
Well, I think you sort of touched on it earlier. My sense is that the concept of zero trust in Australia, in quotation marks, is newer than it is in the States. So, like you, whenever I talk about zero trust, I always think about ringing up Michael for advice on it. But one of the observations that we make at GME is we circulate, in particular amongst the defence organisations, the national security organisations, and some of the critical infrastructure markets who are considering their cybersecurity arrangements. One of the observations we make is they've heard of zero trust, but the level of maturity in their understanding of zero trust as an approach to network security is highly varied. And my observation is generally less mature than what I see and hear when we're talking to equivalents in the States. Now, I guess that's a matter of opinion. Many of my Australian friends might dispute that, but it's an observation. And what we see, perhaps not when we're talking to the IT crowd, but when we're talking to the business level leaders, is this idea that they know zero trust exists, but many think it's just a pure technology solution and they can buy it off the shelf. Where, the more I talk to folks like Michael, the more I realise, of course, is that it's not about technology. It's about process. It's about people. It's about organisational behaviours. Zero trust is almost a lifestyle, if you like.
Oh, I like that. So we call it, I've referred to it as an architecture, a philosophy, but I like lifestyle. And what you said about ideas around zero trust in Australia, I think those ideas are still here. I feel like I've been around it so much now that it doesn't seem like I hear people say as much, "Oh, do you have a zero trust product?" But certainly even 5 years ago, I would go to a trade show and people would come up to our booth and say, "Do you have zero trust?" Like it was a product. And I suspect we still get that here. Michael, do you still hear that?
Yeah, people think it's like some salt that you can just sprinkle across the network and you'll be safe, right?
Yeah, right.
And so there's like I said, there's definitely good things that it introduces. Data at rest being encrypted, data in motion being encrypted. Um, you know, making sure that you have good role separation between your privileged and your unprivileged users and what they do or don't have access to. So there is a lot of good things there, but it's not a panacea. It doesn't solve all your problems.
Right. It's a lifestyle.
Yeah. Well, it's really the zero trust words that are used are actors and objects. And so an actor is an application, could be a user, could be another server asking an object, asking for access to an object, which could be the data, right? So that's a file. Right. It could be a particular amount of information that is trying to query from a database. So that is the transactional nature of it. Can this actor have access to this object? And so that's a good. They've layered on top of that behavior based access. So am I in the office at the normal office hours? Then I can do certain things. If I'm outside of those office hours, maybe I'm not allowed to do those things. And so there's additional kind of constraints outside of just yes or no, do you have access to this thing? So it can get pretty complicated as far as how much of the sensor data that they get, like is your computer actually patched? Are all your virus definitions up to date? So that's your endpoint security. So it measures the device that is managed on the network, the user's behavior, and the time of the day and things like that to establish these patterns of what is normal behavior, and then tries to anticipate potential and flag potential things that may look odd. So the kind of the thing that it doesn't do is once the actor has access to the object, that is where zero trust ends and cybersecurity comes in, because the kind of the threat vectors that you can have once those things are allowed to talk to each other or interact is you have uh, data corruption that can happen, right? That can be unintentional or intentional.
Mm-hmm.
Zero trust is not going to prevent a person from corrupting data if that's what they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
It can malicious content. If I open up an Excel file that I have access to, I can write a Visual Basic macro, and there's pretty powerful things that you can do with Visual Basic inside Excel. I can copy that over to somebody's file share and give them permissions to read it. And when they launch it, I could have, a button in there that maybe says calculate the cell, but it actually will scan the file system and let me know the names of all the documents in their document folder. And so those kinds of things that happen once the access is granted is really where cyber comes in. Supply chain, working with external companies, ingesting data from external sources. You don't know where they are on their journey to zero trust compliance. So you really need to be conscious of those external boundaries for the businesses that you interact with. If you follow strict zero trust and you don't have the ability to measure their computer and whether it's been patched or not, you would say, okay, well, they just not going to have access to my network. Well, then your supply chain's broken at that point. So you have to be able to assume a certain amount of risk and then figure out how to mitigate that risk so that you can continue with your normal business operations.
So there's some complexity here, isn't there? And wherever I see complexity, particularly where clearly implementing a zero trust approach in an organisation is a whole of business affair. It's not for the IT team alone. And where there's that complexity, education is required. And I guess going back to your earlier point, Carolyn, in terms of my sense of where the Australian ecosystem is on this, it's early days for Australia. I look at how education is being promoted from the Australian government on the philosophy around zero trust, and it exists. And so our lead signals intelligence organisation in Australia, the Australian Signals Directorate, has an important arm called the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. That's the defence-focused side of our National Signals Intelligence organisation, really involved in national cybersecurity. They are promoting zero trust. They're promoting it under a broader banner called Modern Defensible Architecture, or MDA, and they've pushed that out publicly. And so listeners can go to the website for that and haul down their MDA papers. The observation I make is February 2025, they put out really a discussion piece on MDA and zero trust for commentary. That tells me that they are also in the early days of how do we communicate this to the public? How do we reinforce the principles that Michael started to outlay as something that businesses and government agencies start to think about it? I suspect NSA and the equivalent agencies are a bit further down the track than perhaps what I'm seeing in Australia, but I'll stand corrected when I'm proven wrong.
Big piece of its big dependency on really becoming zero trust compliant is modernization. There's a lot of legacy equipment that just doesn't support endpoint security and things like that you really need to have a robust zero trust implementation. So there are definitely upfront costs. Inside the American Department of War, money was put out there to help organizations modernize key parts of their infrastructure. But that was like a one-time deal. And there wasn't enough money for everybody, right? So the key programs got to modernize a lot of their infrastructure. There's still a lot of work that has to be done after that. So there's, to your point, it was kind of an undefined problem. They've tried to give it some testable criteria so that you can say whether or not you did a good job with your zero trust implementation. So now there's a zero trust self-assessment that government agencies do. So they go in and they implement their zero trust, then they go through the security controls, and then they do the self-assessment and they come up with a certain level of compliance with zero trust. That is handed off, and you can actually have a formal assessment of your zero trust network, and they'll do some penetration testing. But if your score isn't high enough on the self-assessment, they won't come test your network because they know that they can get in. Like, you haven't really implemented anything to the point where you're going to prevent that lateral movement of malware or something like that across your network. So there's kind of the identifying what the key things are in your network that you need to modernize, modernizing those things, isolating them, and then to start monitoring. Now I've got to start monitoring to make sure that I have a good idea that all of those things are have properly addressed, software patches and things like that. And so a lot of cyber incidents that have happened have been around patched software. So and almost all of the breaches have a VPN involved. So the firewall and the VPN aren't enough to really secure networks anymore. The threat has become way more complex than those things prevent.
And Michael, you said a couple of things. So you said that once bad actor gets in the room and has access to data, then that's where zero trust ends. And then you talked about these legacy systems. Both of those things, I guess, lead us to another myth that we've run into, and we're running into this now in the States. And I think, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but you are as well, is that if you have a zero trust architecture in place, which, by the way, a lot of people think zero trust is just having access management in place, right? So if you have a zero trust architecture in place, then you don't need cross-domain systems. And so is that right, Chris? Are you running into that myth in Australia?
Yeah, look, we are. There's a general observation, I think, that people interpret a zero trust approach, a zero trust architecture, is all about being able to validate every entity on the network, whether it's a document, a person, a laptop computer, a piece of operational technology. If I'm validating who they are, where they are, and the circumstances in which they're accessing the network, I know what they can access and what they can't access. And therefore, I have the luxury of not having to secure the boundaries of my network. The challenge, I think, of course, is, and Michael can talk to this more elaborately, is that's actually at odds with the zero trust approach, but also it's thinking that leads you down the path of trying to boil the ocean to ensure that every part of your network and every part of the network that you control wants to connect to other networks is covered by this approach. That's almost unachievable. And so the principle of segmentation and boundary management, as I call it, remains key. And I'm sure Michael would offer that, in fact, that level of boundary management is what makes zero trust possible for any particular enterprise.
Talk about this myth about not needing cross-domain if you have zero trust architecture in place, because I'm just going to put it out there. I don't think you can have a true zero trust architecture unless you have cross-domain. But we could argue that point.
Really, remember the premise of zero trust, the reason that you don't trust anything is because you assume the malicious actor is present. And so if that's not the mentality and you're looking at it as though you're getting back to I'm going to implicitly trust people. So the whole idea is there is no implicit trust. Everything is explicit. And so you not only control access, but you need to really think about what could a malicious actor do once they had access to the information or the resource. And that is kind of the piece where cyber does come in. The modernization problem, right? Figuring out what you can afford, you can bound that. You can say, okay, I'm going to build a zero trust architecture around these key pieces of my enterprise. and I can put the behavior analytics and all of that kind of stuff inside there, and I can have a really robust security posture. Um, but on that boundary with everything else, the legacy networks and my external companies that I interface with, maybe users have bring your own device. They're running applications for work on their phone. Those kinds of things that are outside of your managed devices that you have modernized, you just assume that there's going to be a persistent threat there. And that's when it becomes key to inspect the data that goes in and out of the network. Number one, what's coming in, making sure that those malware threats are not there, and the data going out, making sure that you're sharing only the data that you need to be sharing. And part of that is going to be, tagging all of that data, making sure you have the appropriate data tags that when information does leave the enterprise, you can make a decision whether or not it should leave. And that's a pretty hefty lift. Even the DoD, they have on some networks from 5 to 10 year retention policies for information. So a tremendous amount of data is already out there on those classified networks. It's all marked at the level of the network, almost all of it. And so even though it may be a lunch menu because it's on that network, it's marked top secret.
Right.
So it's a real kind of significant problem. There's just literally so much data out there that by the time they get it labeled, it'll be irrelevant.
So cross domain helps with knowing what's going in and out, right? Policing that. Is there a play there for the data tagging? I don't think so.
Yeah. So if you're coming off a lot of times in the zero trust architectures, you have your segments of your network and particular data gets tagged and it can go to that particular network segment. If it's coming from a large pool of data that's on instead of a data-centric network, but a network-centric network, so all the data is kind of at the same label, you can put some business logic into the CDS to make some decisions and put labels on data that otherwise wouldn't have been labeled. So it's kind of like just-in-time labeling instead of investing a significant amount of labeling data that you may never need or request.
Okay, that makes sense. I hadn't thought about that. I can't think of any organization or agency that's starting their zero trust journey with a clean slate, like building their network from the ground up. They all have the legacy systems that you're talking about, like some with decades of legacy systems. Talk about what that looks like and how, Michael, these agencies are handling implementing zero trust.
Yeah, definitely large efforts to get to zero trust because, again, there are some pretty significant benefits of having zero trust implemented. So when it comes to actually going to a program and telling them that they're going to have to implement all of this zero trust into their business operations, it can be quite disruptive. And so many of them are applying for waivers. They're saying, yes, we know we need to be zero trust compliant. Yes, we understand that we've got to take certain steps, but we just can't tolerate a significant disruption in what we're doing. And so then it comes back to, well, what can you do? What can you scope in? What can you manage? What steps can you take today? And then they ask for a plan of action, a milestone. So when are you going to start doing those key things and by what date? So you can't just say, I can't get to it right now. You have to have a plan in place. And that plan can change. They push it out another year every year, right? But it is a logistical challenge. It is a sustainment challenge, the human capital of skill sets that you need to manage. And even if you have an external company come in and implement the, dozens of products to get you zero trust compliant, that company leaves, that set of integrators leave. Now you need people inside to troubleshoot the network and maintain that huge zero trust infrastructure stack of products. That is a pretty significant skill set It's very broad, and it's not going to be one or two people. It's going to be a team of people maintaining that suite of products.
Have you worked on an implementation that you can share, like an example of where you've seen this take place?
Yeah. So like looking at Indo-PACOM, looking at their MPE environment that they're standing up, they've worked pretty well to implement a lot of the zero trust pieces, especially related to microsegmentation and access control. But it's really you walk in the data center and it's the new things that have been brought in that are zero trust compliant, right? So, oh, here's our 3 racks of equipment that we just got in, and we had all the engineers here and we built it out, and those stacks of equipment, they've got zero trust in that kind of bubble,
Hmm.
but it's not like it can uh, infect and sanitize the entire data center because you've got
Okay.
that rack of equipment there. So there's lots and lots and lots of racks of equipment that they use for mission, have been there for 20, 30, 40 years. I had one man that was at a conference talking about it, and he said, I can literally hear the relays clicking inside some of this equipment. That's how old it is. So from the 60s, you've got this,
And
mechanical relays.
these dinosaur boxes, cross domain can still work on them, can still
Well, you
isolate.
just again, the role of the cross-domain appliance is to inspect the data to make sure that it's good. Right? So that's number one. Is it properly formatted data? Is the data in the ranges that I expect?
Mhm.
So if there is a malicious actor out there trying to manipulate data and uh, poison your AI or something like that, you can take some steps as the data comes in and verify and stop it before it even makes it to those applications.
Yeah.
So
So
the
the old
so
boxes
the
don't matter. Those old
yeah, so
guys,
again,
it's fine.
yeah, there you can't you're gonna arrive at a false sense of security if you assume that zero trust is going to make you safe. The mindset has to be there is a persistent threat out there. The malware companies, they're huge profit centers for the
Mm.
different countries that they work in.
Mhm.
And so they're like Fortune 500 companies now. It's not a 16-year-old in their basement with a hoodie on, listening to Depeche Mode. It's a graduate team at a university sponsored by that their senior project is to try to break into an Air Force site.
Yeah.
So it's a completely different scale and a skill set of what's being done out there, and the countermeasures of that. It's going to be really hard to necessarily anticipate everything that they're going to do, but if you can inspect all the data as it comes in and out, and at least get that piece of it there, you're going to stop a lot of things that they could potentially do.
Mhm. How similar is the situation that Michael's just talking about, especially with the legacy systems,
Mm.
Chris, in Australia?
You'll be pleased to know it feels almost identical. And so if one was to look at looking into the federal government sector in Australia, if we focus in on the Department of Defence, the legacy environment is really comprised at the highest level of three independent um, separated networks: a top secret network for the nation's crown jewels, a secret network where all defence, a lot of defence commercial and a lot of defence operational data is kept, and an internet-facing network for day-to-day business. Those networks have been generated over 30 years. They're the
Mhm.
product of a convergence of a range of discrete networks that have been set up by agencies inside defence. It traverses traditional IT, on-prem IT, cloud-based IT, a lot of operational technology within those networks, in particular on the internet-facing network. And so all the problems that Mike's highlighted are echoed in Australia, and it's a live issue. So if one looks at the Australian defence the forecast program of records for updating defence capability, at the forefront are our information technologies and cybersecurity uplifts. So each of those three networks I spoke to are going through or about to start a major generational uplift as we speak. They're going to be cloud-based, hyperscaled instantiations of those networks, and in the deployable environment, the field environment at sea, in the air, and on the land, we're seeing major uplifts in the deployable network infrastructure. And in speaking to program managers and executives associated with all of those programs that are underway, zero trust is at the centre of their thinking. And I think the specialists are alert to the challenges that Michael's talking about, that it is not a simple uplift. It's going to be complicated, and that boundary management and cross-domain are going to be key attributes of any final solution.
Mm-hmm. It is a really mammoth undertaking. And Michael, I think I heard you say this, correct me if I'm wrong, but with the Indo-PACOM situation, the way they're tackling this mammoth undertaking is one bite at a time and using microsegmentation to, do it one piece at a time. Is that fair? Okay.
Yeah, it really is modernization. So as they bring new capabilities in, they've kind of said, if you're going to bring something new into the data center, then that has to be part of the zero trust architecture that we're going to be implementing, right? So it's really combining modernization with that hardening.
Okay. And am I mixing things up when I say they're using microsegmentation to apply a zero trust architecture to this piece of it? Am I confusing things?
It's working with our foreign partners. And so inside their multi-partner environment, you can think of each foreign partner having their own network segment, right? So I've got my network broken up by country. And inside each one of those, I have different services that I offer that are on their own particular little pieces. So, the video conferencing system, for example, doesn't need to talk to the storage system. So you would say there's no reason to have those two on the same VLAN. Okay. So that's the kind of thought processes that comes in. So as they build out like those capabilities, it's really kind of bringing them in from that understanding that I'm going to try and minimize interaction and isolate things as much as possible. Mm-hmm. That's much easier to do with those new capabilities that you're bringing in there. And then the concept of a national gateway is, we have control of a certain aspect of that, but when we want to connect that foreign country into our MPE environment at that boundary, we need a CDS because we don't know what the cyber hygiene or the technical maturity level of their zero trust implementation. And so we really want to share information and we have to collaborate. But we need to be smart about how we do that. And that's where the cross-domain technology definitely comes into play.
Okay. So when we're talking about microsegmentation, it's a big part of zero trust, but are there pitfalls that people need to be aware of?
Yeah. So breaking everything up into independent networks, different IP space. If you follow the DoD standards, every country would be given its own IP subnet, which means that you have a router in between all of those with a firewall. You have different security certificates that you issue out there. And so when it comes, if you have a problem that you need to troubleshoot between those different network segments and the different services, you're not going to be able just to go one place and find all the information of how things work. So log aggregation is really what you need to do. You need to take all the logs from all the different pieces there and feed them into one central log repository. Typically, that's defensive cyber operations or a SOC, or, there's different terms for that. But what that does is by creating this touch point where the logging system now touches every microsegment, you created a new attack vector. If
Right.
the adversary can get onto the logging network, then they can take over the entire network, and that blast radius just became the entire network. Um, so that's Owl's technology is used in a lot of the DoD enterprise and commercially to isolate those networks that collect the logs, so that when you do have your microsegmentation and you aggregate all that logs, if the malware gets into one of your network segments and it gets into the logging network, it can't move across the network to all the other microsegments.
Mm.
So we typically have our diodes deployed so that the logging information goes from the services in the microsegment into that log aggregation area. Now you can do your continuous monitoring, which is a big part of Zero Trust. I can use my SIEM tools. So the SOAR is kind of the more advanced part of that. So the security orchestration. So maybe my Splunk dashboard is going to set up some alerts. The AI that's monitoring the normal business operations can look at patterns and identify some anomalies. And then based on those, if once proven out, take some proactive steps that doesn't necessarily need to immediately have a person in the loop, but can alert, hey, I'm going to isolate this section of the network. I'm going to tell the firewall to close all the ports. I'm going to tell the router not to route any information out of there, and completely contain that area that is potentially contaminated.
Hmm. What about zero trust at the tactical edge? I mean, you've got people, you've got machines, you've got dispersed networks over like really far apart too. And,
Mhm.
different partners trying to talk to each other. So they all need to share data, they all need to talk. Um, how does zero trust work there?
I, there are definitely more challenges at the edge, especially when you're not in peacetime. Generally, the thoughts are that the first volley of any attack is going to be a cyber attack, right?
Hmm.
It's frankly the fastest way to just be disruptive. And you're literally traveling at the speed of light across wires, under and fiber cables under the ocean. Um, so you think about the continuous authentication. Generally, you want a nice enterprise centralized authentication and authorization system with services for authentication and authorization that are not at the edge, but actually back at a hosted data center. Um, for continuity of operations, if that gets severed, you still need to be able to use those systems that are there. And if you can't authenticate, then you're denied access to everybody. So
Mm.
there is a lot of thought into um, caching that information. How long can you survive with that disconnection? And then if it really is the kind of first wave of a kinetic attack, most likely that's going to be an extended disconnect. Do I have break glass accounts? Is there a way where I can actually say, you know, I I recognize that the threat is there, and I'm going to have to live with it. I'm going to have to open up some of these locks, take my security posture and take some of those risks because I need to use what's there, and I can't isolate myself from it.
Mm. Chris, what are you seeing in Australia as far as trying to apply zero trust architecture at the tactical edge?
We're certainly seeing program managers and those folks responsible for defining the requirements for deployable networking, um, talking zero trust. I mean, I think Michael touched on a few really good points here. To me, it's the diversity in devices that you want to connect, the diversity of people and the circumstances they're in that you want to connect, make it more and more complex for you to be confident in your zero trust implementation across the enterprise. It reinforces for me, I guess, two things. One, just from a cost management point of view and a risk management point of view, you've got to focus on your crown jewels. Don't try and secure everything when you simply don't have the time or the resources to do so effectively. And again, that draws me back into my thinking around segmentation and and bounding where you try to apply the zero trust architecture. But autonomous systems, remote systems, international partnerships all increase complexity and reinforce, I think, the point Mike's been making about segmentation and boundaries.
And I'm just thinking about, if we don't want to say that the cross-domain is part of your zero trust architecture, then I still want to say it. But if you're practicing this defense in depth, and especially at the tactical edge, zero trust, it feels like it's not enough. You've got to do the segmentation with the cross-domain.
In the Department of War Zero Trust Reference Architecture, they talk about they don't specifically call out a CDS, but much of what a CDS does, they talk about in the gateway and broker that sits between the segments. Mm-hmm. And the job of that is to terminate, inspect, validate all of the information that goes between the microsegments. So it's not just that there's a firewall there, but there is actual inspection of the information that's being exchanged to make sure that it meets what we understand to be known good data and known good requests. And that is kind of, if you follow it to the T, there's a next generation firewall with a Splunk instance doing the continuous monitoring with a gateway that's inspecting all the data that's being exchanged. Okay. So it's not just at the boundary of the zero trust architecture that you've built, interfacing with the outside world that maybe doesn't have zero trust, but even internally, depending on perceived risk, you may want to have that deep content inspection and data validation just between the pieces inside the network. Because again, data corruption and malicious kind of activity can be an internal actor to the company, a disgruntled employee. Those kind of things are not going to be stopped by zero trust until, and the consequence of it can be pretty severe. So you want to be able to make sure that for those crown jewels, you are validating the data that's coming in and out of there, and thinking about what could a malicious actor do, and am I taking steps to try and mitigate those things that a malicious actor could do.
So what about AI? We have to talk about AI for a minute. Mm-hmm. So we've got these autonomous systems. We've got AI coming online. They're becoming more integrated with these critical networks. What kind of complexities is that introducing for a zero trust architecture?
AI really needs to be treated like a person when it comes to giving it access to information. You still need to be concerned about what data it's aggregating, because depending on if it's a large language model that people can ask questions, they might be able to construct a question that gives them access to information that they otherwise wouldn't have access to. So it can definitely rapidly consume information and condense it. But when you're looking at least privilege and the ability to commit fraud or things like that, you really need to start looking at and I think this is where some of the AI agent kind of thought process that brought those things about is, instead of having one AI that does everything, have particular instances of AI agents that are more specific. And then you can kind of bound the information that piece has access to and what rights it has on your network.
So you're segmenting the AI ability to move laterally through the systems. Okay. All right. Well, we're bumping up against time, but I love a good list. So I want to know, Michael, if you can end with like 5 concrete steps that leaders can take today to start their zero trust journey.
It really comes, the very first step is just to identify what's on your network. I think that there's a lot of shadow IT is often the term that's used with it. It can be very helpful and get things done quickly in a small company where people will just, stop on the way to work and stop at Best Buy and pick up some infrastructure for the office, and they bring it in and it stays there for 15 years. And a lot of times that isn't cataloged or indexed or tracked or sustained. And so there's a first big step of just figuring out what is on your network, what are the things that are there. Do you actually know everything that is on your
Honestly,
network?
Michael, that's making me tired. That sounds like that could take years. I mean, I don't even know what's in my cupboards. How
Yeah.
do you?
Yeah, there are companies that do offer that as a part of the zero trust
Like
stack, right?
observability, like a Datadog or a Dynatrace?
Yeah, it'll go out and try to catalog everything that's on the network.
Okay.
What I've seen kind of that comes out of that is when you find pieces of equipment that nobody knew about, then you've got to make the decision, do I replace it? If it's multiple organizations involved, there's a lot of finger pointing going around because they didn't plan for it, they didn't budget.
Right.
So um, there really has to be some C-suite kind of governance that comes
We're,
down and
we're going to
just
have
kind
our
of,
own show just for that one. So,
okay. Yeah. So
okay.
once
So
once you do that, then the second thing you need to
inventory is
do is,
one. Now
yes,
what's next?
next is figuring out taking a step back from that. I'm inside the network, I'm plugged into the office, minimizing the blast radius by figuring out what things actually need to talk to each other and making a plan for segmentation.
Mhm.
If you don't know what the things are on your network from an application standpoint or a data standpoint and the interactions between all of those different pieces, then it's going to be really hard to have a plan for microsegmentation. Um, so that's the second part of it is the planning and the isolation activities in your network. Um, Once you've done that, the data validation piece of it is the cyber piece of it comes in along with your starting to implement multi-factor authentication, things like that. Um, are you separating people on your identity management, your access management based on their roles? A lot of times, you can put a lot of information in your Active Directory tree, but it's got to be populated. And so, as people have moved around jobs in the company, a lot of times they'll move departments that are somewhat related but are supposed to be isolated, and they carry along their privileges, right? So there's another step of if my network's been out there for a while and I've got, a lot of people typically have moved around, and this is again something we should be doing anyway, go back and look through the data rights of the people in the different departments that they're in and verify that they only have the rights that they need and that they haven't over time just by reorgs or whatever have happened, accumulated extra privileges that they don't really need anymore.
So role-based management.
Yeah, and
Okay.
validation of that
Yep.
creep of privilege over time.
Okay.
Yep. Then the kind of the next piece of that as you're getting more mature is kind of budgeting. So now I've got a plan for my microsegmentation. I've got my devices identified. I've got to look at what can actually run some of these monitoring agents to determine that it's in a good state. Probably going to find some stuff that's completely end of life, end of service, and you're going to have to replace it. So there's a what can we do and what should we do, right? Those aren't the same thing, and you don't want to um, spend a lot of money and have a partial implementation that doesn't get you the security that you were hoping for. You really want to try and say, okay, well, this is my budget. Here's what I'm trying to protect. Try to come up with a schedule and a cost estimate and make sure that that is something in a business that you're able to do and a upfront cost you're able to absorb, the resources to staff it, and the skill sets in the company. Are you going to be able to do it with the people you have there, or are you going to have to bring in some outside help to get you across the finish line with that?
Did we get four? So I got role-based management. We're going to budget. And then what was my last one? Or was budget my
Then
last one?
yeah, the very last piece is the human capital piece, right?
Okay.
Uh,
That's right. Because zero trust, like there's a lot of skill sets involved. Like you've talked about the US government talks about like zero trust in a box, and you've shared with me that it's 35 different
Vendors.
tools,
Yes.
different vendors, different skill sets. So the human capital piece here is huge.
Yeah.
Okay.
So once you've looked at that plan, it might be that that's when you go to a Dell or somebody like that and you say, this is just too much for us as an enterprise to take on, as a company to take on, and consider those for service providers that will do that for
Right.
you.
So you guys, we're really running up against time. Can I keep you a few minutes past the hour?
Sure.
I'm
Are we
okay.
good? Okay. Because the tech talk questions are my favorite part of the show. And I know it's going to take longer. So these are just gut reactions. And we'll bounce between the two of you who has to answer first. So, Chris, what's the weirdest legacy system that you've seen still connected to a network?
I'm not sure whether the devices I'm thinking about are really weird, but it's happened a few times, both in my past as a military officer and in an organisation running a lot of OT, and that was finding Windows XP devices and Windows 98 devices still connected into a range of military applications and a range of factories running OT, and in both cases, no organisation wanted to move them out because they did a discreet job. It worked, and no one wanted to touch them. Also, number of applications that we keep coming across that are written in C. Harder and harder to find software engineers and programmers to maintain that product.
Okay. Michael, what about you?
I think mine, it was in the finance. I worked at a university finance department, and there was a computer that sat in the corner. It was an interface to the state banking system. It was a
Wait, what? Like as in cooking?
banking,
Baking?
the
Banking,
banking.
banking.
Yeah. And so again, it worked. Nobody really knew what it did or how it did it, but that's how money moved around, and they were
Oh.
afraid to death to touch it.
Oh my
And
gosh.
and so it was actually my job to try to nurse it along when things broke. And so when you took the case off the top of it, there were literally wires where they had, in electronics they call it blue wiring, but they weren't blue. They were different colored wires where there was a problem with the board layout. And before it shipped from the factory, they had soldered wires to fix the problems on the PCB, because it was a really, really old first run computer, right?
Yeah.
And so you look at that and you think, my goodness, if that dies, we're really in trouble.
The world ends. That's right. All right, Chris, what's a cybersecurity myth you'd like to delete forever?
Hey, I've thought about a few of these over the years. The one that I keep landing on is the myth that my standalone computer, my standalone network, my disconnected piece of factory equipment can't be hacked. My experience is that those disconnected computers or devices probably aren't. Most of these devices are either connected and nobody knows about it, or they're connected intermittently and exposed as much as any other network.
Well, I'm going to continue to love my personal myth that my iPhone can't be hacked. I'm sticking with that. I need that, you guys. So,
That's right.
Michael, what about you?
I think I've said this before in one of our other presentations, is that people assume that if they're working from home over the VPN, that they're secure. I think that VPNs definitely protect data in transit, but they provide a level of confidentiality that will also hide bad content, the same it will hide good content. So in some ways, a VPN can protect you from a confidentiality standpoint, but from a cyber standpoint, there really isn't any significant protection from today's threats that a VPN offers you.
Yeah, I don't want to know that. I'm Yes, it can.
I'm relying on
It
it.
can protect me. Okay, guys. Chris, I'm going to have you do this one first again.
Sure.
You wake up in a dystopian future where your digital identity has been stolen and repurposed as an AI assistant for an evil empire. What's your first move to reclaim it, and who or what do you recruit to help?
Okay. I'm not sure this is a characterize this as a fun question, Carolyn, but hey, I'm gonna make the assumption that my stolen digital twin, if you like, is speaking to the user of the AI assistant with my normal voice, and so I'm going to hope that the evil empire was anticipating that the vast majority of identities that they were sourcing were from the United States. And as such, they were not expecting an AI assistant with a
And they
harsh
just can't
Australian
understand
accent.
you?
Yeah. So my first step will be to speak too quickly. And then my second step will be to use Australian vernacular to confuse and bewilder listeners. In short, I'm going to try and make it too difficult to work with. And so I'll be set aside in favour of more useful AI assistants. But to be fair, hope's not a plan. So the first person I'll be calling is Michael, whom I call to get me out of all sorts of IT-related jams.
Yeah, that's who I would call first too. Michael, what about you? What would your plan be?
Well, I think identity management from a technology standpoint is typically done with PKI right today, right? Which is annoying, difficult. Users don't like it. As identity becomes harder and harder to prove, uh, exactly what you're talking about, right? Creating a virtual presence that isn't what it appears to be is going to be commonplace. I think people will create their own personas, their own avatars, because it'll be so easy. Um, so given that, I think what is going to happen is it's going to make us really do the important stuff in person, because that's the only way you're going to know
Yep.
for sure
Mm.
that you have authentic
Yeah.
interaction.
I saw today a colleague shared with me her digital twin, and she pulled it up on the screen. And I said, which one is you and which one is the digital twin? Now, when the digital twin started talking, I could tell it was still a little bit glitchy.
Mm.
But next week, that will be gone. And I would not be able to tell which,
Yeah.
if it's really her, or if, is it really you guys? Are you guys really talking to me right now?
That's the obvious next question.
Right? All
Mhm.
right. Chris, as organizations are trying to navigate this zero trust implementation, where can they reach you?
Sure. Well, you can reach me on LinkedIn, but equally, we can link up via the GME website, so gme.net.au in Australia, and that there's a nice conduit there as well to both me and our cyber defence colleagues.
Great. Michael, how about you?
Yeah, I'm in LinkedIn as well, and you'll find me on the Owl Cyber Defense website as well.
All right. Well, thank you both for this conversation today. You, Chris, early in the morning, you late at night. Michael, thank you for making it work.
Yep.
Around the world. Thank you.
All right.
Yes. Thanks.
And thank you, listeners, for joining in. Please share this episode. Please give us a review. It helps us reach people that can benefit from this content. Smash that like button. Tech Transforms is produced by Show and Tell. Until next time, stay curious and keep imagining the future. Thanks for joining us on Tech Transforms. If you enjoyed this episode, please smash that like button and talk about it with a friend. I'm Carolyn Ford, and this is Tech Transforms.